The quiet world of Noah. The rhythmic patter of rain against the window pane was Noah's favorite symphony. Each drop, a tiny percussionist, joined a chorus that lulled the world outside into a state of serene contemplation. He sat, curled in the worn armchair, a heavy hardback resting open on his lap, its pages filled with the adventures of a fictional explorer. The soft glow of the reading lamp cast a warm, intimate circle around him, pushing back the encroaching twilight. Outside, the world was dimming, blurring into shades of charcoal and indigo. But inside, his small living room was a haven of gentle light and quiet comfort. Noah adjusted his glasses, a faint smile touching his lips as he absorbed the words. The scent of old paper and rain-washed earth drifted to him, a subtle perfume that always accompanied these evenings. He loved these moments, the unhurried passage of time, the luxury of uninterrupted thought. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities, filled with the murmurs of stories waiting to be told and ideas waiting to be explored. He wasn't lonely, not in the slightest. Loneliness, he mused, was a state of mind, not a lack of company. His company was the characters on the page, the gentle hum of his refrigerator, the soft sigh of the wind outside. Eventually, the words on the page began to blur, not from fatigue, but from a growing desire for another familiar ritual. He carefully marked his place with a thin leather bookmark and rose from the chair, stretching his limbs. The old floorboards creaked a soft protest beneath his feet, a sound as familiar and comforting as his own heartbeat. He made his way to the kitchen, the soft murmur of the rain following him like a faithful companion. The kettle, a squat, dependable copper vessel, found its place on the stove. While the water heated, he selected a ceramic mug, its surface smooth and cool beneath his fingers. He chose a calming blend of chamomile and lavender, the dried petals a muted confetti of peace. The subtle herbal aroma began to unfurl even before the hot water touched them, promising warmth and tranquility. He watched the steam rise, a delicate wisp against the cool air of the kitchen, mesmerized by its ephemeral beauty. With the warm mug cradled in both hands, he returned to the living room, settling back into his armchair. The book remained closed, a silent promise for later. For now, he simply sat, sipping his tea, letting its warmth spread through him. The liquid was like a balm, easing any lingering tension from the day, settling his thoughts into a quiet rhythm. Noah looked around his small home, a reflection of his own nature. Bookshelves lined the walls, overflowing with tales of every genre, each spine a memory of a journey taken. A few potted plants thrived on the windowsill, their green leaves a vibrant contrast to the muted tones of the room. A hand-knitted blanket, a gift from his grandmother years ago, draped over the back of the sofa, its soft wool inviting. Everything had its place, a sense of order that brought him immense peace. He often wondered what others thought of his quiet existence. His friends, when he did see them, would sometimes gently prod him about going out more, meeting new people. But Noah found a deep satisfaction in his solitude, a richness in the introspection that often eluded those caught in the whirlwind of constant social engagement. He enjoyed connection, certainly, and cherished the few deep friendships he had, but he understood the delicate balance of giving and receiving, of stepping out and stepping back. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he acted, finding wisdom in the nuances of human interaction that others often missed. He was an anchor in his own world, steady and unwavering. The rain continued its gentle serenade, a soothing backdrop to his thoughts. He pictured the world outside, hushed and glistening, preparing for the quiet slumber of night. A faint sense of anticipation stirred within him, a subtle shift in the air that spoke of change. He knew the seasons would turn, the patterns of his life would evolve, and new experiences would inevitably arrive, whether he sought them or not. But for now, in this moment, he was utterly content. The world outside his window was a vast, unknowable entity, full of clamor and chaos. But within these walls, in the soft glow of his lamp, with a good book and a warm cup of tea, Noah was perfectly, wonderfully at peace. He savored the last sip of his tea, the warmth lingering on his tongue, a silent prayer of gratitude for the quiet world he had carefully built around himself. It was a world he cherished, a sanctuary he never wanted to see disturbed. The thought, however fleeting, caused a tiny, unfamiliar ripple in the calm surface of his contentment. He dismissed it quickly, attributing it to the late hour and the gentle melancholy of the rain. There was no reason for anything to change. His life was, and would remain, a symphony of soft rustles and gentle hums. A knock in the dark. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11 times, each resonant note a gentle punctuation mark at the end of Noah's day. He had just settled back into his armchair, the scent of chamomile rising from his mug, a fresh chapter of his novel unfurling before him when it came. A sound so unexpected, so out of place in the quiet sanctity of his evening, that he almost dismissed it as a trick of the old house. A soft, hesitant knock. He paused, book lowered, brow furrowed. No one ever called at this hour. His friends knew his rhythms, respected his quiet. The sound came again, a little surer this time, but still muted, as if the person on the other side were afraid to disturb the peace too much. Noah's initial instinct was to ignore it, and to let the world outside his walls remain outside. But a flicker of something, a faint curiosity, prodded him. He set his book down carefully, the warmth of the tea mug still clinging to his fingers. As he walked down the short hallway, the polished wooden floor cool beneath his bare feet, a sliver of apprehension curled in his stomach. The porch light cast a pale, circular glow onto the flagstones. He peered through the peephole. A figure stood on his porch, silhouetted against the night, shoulders hunched. A young man, unfamiliar, looking utterly lost. Noah unlatched the deadbolt, the click echoing in the sudden silence, and slowly opened the door, leaving the security chain in place. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice soft, a touch of surprise in its tone. The man flinched, as if caught doing something wrong. His eyes, even in the dim light, held a raw anxiety that pulled at something deep within Noah. He was tall, but his posture made him seem smaller, more vulnerable. His dark hair was a bit disheveled, and a shadow of stubble dusted his jawline. He looked weary, as though he hadn't slept in days. I'm Ryan," the man stammered, his voice rough with disuse. "Your new neighbor, from across the street." He gestured vaguely, with a hand that trembled slightly. I just needed to get out. My place. It's too quiet, or too loud. I don't know." He swallowed hard, his gaze darting past Noah into the dimly lit hallway. "I saw your light on. I just wondered if I could sit on your porch for a bit. I don't need to talk. Just be somewhere else." Noah looked at him, really looked at him. The young man's eyes were wide with a fear that Noah couldn't quite place, but it was palpable, radiating off him in waves. This wasn't a casual late-night visit. This was a plea. He saw the genuine distress etched onto Ryan's face, the desperate hope that Noah wouldn't turn him away. Without a word, Noah unhooked the chain and opened the door fully. "Come in," he said, his voice gentle. "It's too cold to sit out there tonight." Ryan hesitated, his eyes widening slightly, a flicker of surprise replacing some of the anxiety. "Oh, no, I couldn't impose. The porch is fine, really." "Nonsense," Noah insisted, stepping back. "Come in, sit down. I'll make you some tea." He led the way into the living room, indicating the armchair opposite his own. Ryan walked in slowly, his movements stiff, as if unsure of his welcome. He looked around the room, taking in the overflowing bookshelves, the soft lamplight, the quiet order, with a mixture of awe and apprehension. He settled onto the edge of the armchair, not quite relaxing into its depths, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. Noah disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a soft wool blanket draped over his arm and a freshly brewed mug of chamomile tea. He handed the mug to Ryan, the warmth radiating through the ceramic. "Here," he said, extending the blanket. "And this?" Ryan took the mug, his fingers brushing Noah's, a spark of unexpected warmth passing between them. He clutched it like a lifeline. He looked at the blanket, then back at Noah, a silent question in his gaze. "For comfort," Noah offered simply. Ryan unfolded the blanket and wrapped it around his shoulders, and pulling it tight. He took a tentative sip of the tea, a small sigh escaping his lips. Noah returned to his own armchair, picking up his forgotten book, though he made no move to read it. The only sounds in the room were the soft ticking of the clock, the distant hum of the refrigerator, and the gentle clinking of Ryan's mug against the saucer as he took another sip. A new presence had entered Noah's quiet world, a fragile, anxious presence. And for the first time in a long time, Noah felt a ripple, not of unease, but of something else entirely. A nascent curiosity, a soft sense of responsibility, unfurled within him. The silence wasn't quite the same as before, it was shared now, and in that shared quiet, a different kind of peace began to settle. The gentle routine. The hesitant knock at 11 became a familiar sound, a soft punctuation to Noah's otherwise silent evenings. It wasn't a demand, never insistent, but a fragile request for presence. Ryan, a shadow against the porch light, would stand there, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on some point beyond Noah's face. He rarely spoke beyond a quiet, "Evening, Noah," his voice a low rasp. Noah, initially surprised by the first unexpected visit, found himself anticipating the next. He'd brew a fresh pot of chamomile tea as dusk settled, the gentle steam coiling into the deepening twilight of his kitchen. The worn wool blanket, rescued from a chest in the guest room, was folded neatly on the armchair nearest the fireplace, ready for its nightly deployment. He never rushed, never made a show of it. But the preparation became as much a part of his evening ritual as turning down the thermostat or winding the grandfather clock. Ryan always arrived late, after the street had fallen completely quiet, after the last dog bark had faded into the distance. He'd slip in, a ghost in the lamplight, and settle into the armchair. Sometimes he'd take the tea, cradling the warm mug in his hands. But more often, he'd just pull the blanket around him, sinking into its familiar weight. His eyes, though often distant, occasionally flickered to Noah, a brief, wordless acknowledgement that stretched across the quiet room. Their nights were a tapestry of silence. Noah would usually return to his book, the soft rustle of turning pages, the only sound to break the stillness. Ryan would simply exist, his breathing shallow and even, a stark contrast to the restless energy that had first brought him to Noah's door. He never slept, not truly, but seemed to find a fragile peace, a temporary reprieve from whatever shadows pursued him. Noah learned to read the subtle shifts in Ryan's posture, the way his fingers tightened on the blanket, the almost imperceptible tremor in his jaw. He never pressed, never asked, understanding that some burdens were not meant for immediate sharing, but for quiet companionship. He felt a nascent sense of protectiveness, a gentle pull towards this young man who carried such a visible weight. The solitude he had carefully cultivated for years was subtly shifting, replaced by a shared quietude that felt surprisingly comfortable. One evening, a particularly blustery wind rattled the windows, making the old house creak and groan. Ryan, already settled in his chair, flinched at each gust, his body tensing. Noah, without a word, rose and stoked the fire, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. He sat back down, picking up his book, but his gaze kept returning to Ryan. Finally, Ryan spoke, his voice barely a whisper against the wind's howl. The quiet. It's too loud sometimes. Noah nodded slowly. I understand. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. He knew the kind of quiet that pressed in, the kind that amplified every inner turmoil. Ryan leaned his head back, his eyes half closed. It's like the walls are closing in, even when they're not. Noah thought of the vast echoing silence of his own past, the years spent alone after his wife's passing. He knew that feeling of space becoming oppressive. He simply reached out and adjusted the blanket around Ryan's shoulders, a small, comforting gesture. Ryan didn't flinch, didn't pull away, but allowed the touch, a rare acceptance of physical comfort. The nights stretched into weeks. The tea became a ritual, the blanket a symbol of unspoken care. Noah found himself anticipating not just the knock, but the quiet presence that followed. He started leaving a small, unassuming shortbread biscuit on a saucer next to Ryan's mug, a silent offering that was always gone by morning. One night, Ryan arrived with a tremor in his hand that was more pronounced than usual. He took the tea, but his grip on the mug was white-knuckled. He didn't sit immediately, instead, pacing a small circuit in front of the fire, his shadow stretching and shrinking on the wall. Noah watched him, his heart a quiet thrum in his chest. He felt a different kind of tension building, a thread of worry weaving its way into the comfortable routine. Something was different tonight. The usual quiet solace was elusive, replaced by an agitated energy that pulsed in the small living room. Ryan finally stopped, his back to Noah, his shoulders visibly shaking. The silence stretched, heavy and expectant. Noah closed his book, placing it carefully on the side table. He waited. The gentle routine, a comforting balm for weeks, felt fragile tonight, poised on the edge of an unknown shift. Whispers in the night. The night's earlier turmoil had receded, leaving Ryan cloaked in a delicate stillness. As he stood at Noah's threshold, the familiar slump of his shoulders seemed to have eased, replaced by a quiet readiness. Noah, a warmth he hadn't known in years, stirring at the thought of Ryan's anticipated arrival, opened the door before the second knock could fully articulate itself. Come in, he invited, his voice a deep thrum in the quiet air. Ryan stepped into the apartment, his gaze, typically wide with an unspoken burden, now holding a faint, almost imperceptible curiosity. He settled into his accustomed chair, accepting the offered mug of chamomile, his fingers closing around its comforting heat. The blanket, a familiar presence, lay folded on the armrest. Yet, tonight, there was no immediate retreat into its quiet embrace. Instead, a soft utterance broke the hush. There was a blue jay today. Noah, who had been about to turn and settle into his own armchair, paused. His eyes met Ryan's, which were fixed on the blossoming condensation of his mug. A blue jay? Noah gently prompted, his voice barely a breath. Yes. Brilliant blue. Like a fresh bruise almost, Ryan whispered, his voice thin, as if unaccustomed to forming sounds beyond his own mind's confines. It landed on the fence post. Just watch me. Bold. Noah sat, not in his usual spot, but perched on the ottoman opposite Ryan, leaning slightly forward. He listened, truly absorbed by the hesitant words. This was new, a nascent crack in their silent understanding, a blossoming of something fragile and delicate. He found himself captivated by the cadence of Ryan's voice, the way it dipped and rose with each small observation. And the clouds, Ryan continued, a fraction more strength entering his tone. They were like giant cotton balls, stretched thin, almost transparent. You could see the sky through them. So blue. So vast. Noah nodded slowly, a small, encouraging gesture. He conjured the image of the blue jay, the attenuated clouds, seeing them through Ryan's perception. He realized then that Ryan wasn't merely recounting sights. He was offering a glimpse into his interior world, a space previously sealed off by silent suffering. It was a gift, a tender unveiling. The conversation, if it could be called that, unfolded in fits and starts. Ryan spoke of the way the light burnished the old oak in the park, transforming its leaves to molten gold. He mentioned the distant chime of an ice cream truck, its tinny melody carried on the evening breeze. He even described a delicate floral pattern on a teacup at a small cafe he'd passed, a design he'd found surprisingly captivating. Each detail was unassuming, everyday, yet infused with a quiet wonder that belied the deeper turmoil Noah knew still roiled beneath. Noah didn't interrupt or offer platitudes. He simply listened, a steady, grounding presence. He felt a subtle shift within himself, a loosening of the tightly woven threads of his cultivated solitude. He had always found a peculiar solace in his own company, a sense of control and predictability. But now, in the presence of Ryan's soft whispers, a different kind of companionship began to take root. It was less about shared words and more about shared being, a quiet understanding that transcended language. A nascent protectiveness stirred within him. Ryan was like a fledgling, testing nascent wings, vulnerable and exposed. Noah wanted to shield him, to provide a safe harbor where these fragile observations could unfurl without fear. He remembered the agitation of the previous night, knowing that beneath these gentle surface observations, a storm still raged. The air. It smelled like rain today, Ryan whispered, his voice trailing off, a distant look entering his eyes. Even though it never rained, just that fresh, earthy scent, like everything was holding its breath. Noah watched him, the quiet intensity in Ryan's gaze. He could feel the unspoken words hovering between them, the heavier truths that still lay buried. But for now, these small whispers were enough. They were a bridge, slowly and carefully being built across the chasm of Ryan's pain. And Noah, with his steadfast presence and unwavering attention, was ready to help lay each stone. He knew this was just the beginning. The true conversations, either ones that would demand more than just observations of blue jays and clouds, were yet to come. But tonight, the gentle unfolding of Ryan's day was a profound start. The silence returned, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was filled with shared breath, with unspoken understanding, and with the faint echoes of blue jays and distant ice cream trucks. Noah reached out, slowly, and placed his hand over Ryan's, a silent affirmation of his presence, listening and ready for whatever came next. Ryan didn't flinch. Instead, he turned his hand, his fingers lightly curling around Noah's, a tentative connection forged in the quiet comfort of the night. Heavy hearts and shared dreams. The blue jay's harsh call had faded, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves outside Noah's open window. Ryan, nestled deeper into the worn armchair, had gone quiet, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the glass. The earlier lightness, a fragile butterfly wing, had begun to settle, revealing the deeper currents beneath. Noah, stirring his cooling tea, felt a familiar weight descend, not unpleasant this time, but expectant. He waited, his attention a silent, unwavering anchor. Then a whisper, barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. "I had a dream last night." Ryan's voice, usually a low mumble, was thin, stretched taut. Noah merely hummed in acknowledgement, a non-committal sound that invited continuation without pressure. He kept his eyes on his teacup, aware that direct observation might snap the fragile thread Ryan was spinning. It was dark. Ryan swallowed hard, a visible bob in his throat. Like, proper dark, and cold. I was back there, the sand, the dust. But it wasn't just that. His breath hitched. There was this sound, this scraping, like something trying to get out of a box. And I couldn't move. My legs were stuck. And I just knew, that whatever was scraping, It was coming for me. A shiver racked his frame, and he pulled his knees closer to his chest, his hands clenching white-knuckled around his shins. I woke up screaming. The last word was a barely audible exhalation, thick with residual terror. Noah's heart gave a sympathetic lurch. The image Ryan painted, stark and chilling, resonated with a primal fear. Without conscious thought, his hand reached out, not to grasp, but to offer a steadying presence. His fingers landed gently on Ryan's forearm, a light, almost imperceptible pressure. The skin beneath his touch was cool, faintly clammy. He didn't squeeze, didn't pat, just rested his hand there. A silent acknowledgement of the shared space, the shared moment of vulnerability. Ryan flinched slightly at the contact, a momentary tightening of his muscles, but he didn't pull away. Instead, a slow, shuddering breath escaped him, and he leaned ever so slightly into the touch. The quiet intimacy of the gesture hung in the air, a delicate bridge built between them. Noah felt a nascent protectiveness bloom within him, a desire to shield this troubled young man from the persistent echoes of his past. "Nightmares are brutal," Noah finally said, his voice low and even, a counterpoint to the trembling fear in Ryan's. He kept his hand where it was, a silent promise of steadfastness. Ryan nodded, his gaze now fixed on Noah's hand on his arm, as if drawing warmth from it. "Yeah, they stick. Even when you wake up, it's like the cold stays, the fear. It's hard to shake." This was new. The sharing of the dream, the raw honesty, was a crack in the formidable wall Ryan had built around himself. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing to witness. Noah understood instinctively that this was a pivotal moment. He needed to hold the space, to be the unwavering presence Ryan desperately needed. Their conversations that day stretched longer than usual, meandering from the vivid landscapes of dreams to the more mundane territories of everyday life. Ryan, encouraged by Noah's quiet attentiveness, began to elaborate on other fragments of his interior world. He spoke of his childhood fascination with constellations, how he'd spend hours on his roof with a cheap telescope, imagining other worlds. He talked about his grandfather, a gruff but kind man who taught him how to fish and carve small wooden birds. These anecdotes, small windows into his personal history, were offered tentatively, as if testing the air to see if they would be received. Noah, in turn, found himself sharing snippets of his own past, things he hadn't consciously thought about in years. The quiet joy of discovering a rare first edition in a dusty bookstore, the meticulous process of restoring an antique clock, the solitary hikes through pine forests that always cleared his head. He spoke of the satisfaction of a perfectly balanced sentence, the quiet hum of concentration when a complex thought finally found its form on paper. These weren't grand revelations, but they were authentic, revealing layers of himself he rarely exposed. As the afternoon light softened and stretched long shadows across the living room, a subtle shift occurred. The initial tension in Ryan's shoulders began to ease. His words, though still carrying an underlying tremor of vulnerability, flowed more freely. He even managed a hesitant, almost shy smile when Noah recounted a particularly clumsy attempt at baking bread years ago. The air between them, once thick with unspoken burdens, now hummed with a different kind of energy, a nascent connection, fragile but real, built on shared whispers and the quiet comfort of a hand on an arm. Noah felt a stirring warmth in his chest, a loosening of the cultivated solitude he had worn for so long. He understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that this shared vulnerability, this slow, deliberate unfolding, was a dream in itself. A dream he hadn't realized he was waiting for. A safe harbor. The nightmare's icy residue still clung to Ryan, a chill beneath his skin. But Noah's steadfast presence was a soothing balm. His hand, warm and anchoring on Ryan's shoulder, tethered him against the turbulent wake of fear. It was dark, Ryan began, his voice a strained whisper, words snagging in his throat. and cold, and there was this scraping, like metal on concrete, but deeper. It was everywhere. He shivered, drawing his knees tighter to his chest. Noah remained still, an attentive listener, his gaze an unyielding invitation for Ryan to continue. This silent attunement, devoid of judgment or pity, felt like a rare treasure. Ryan found himself recounting the dream's vivid horrors, the crushing darkness, the profound isolation always accompanying that sound. As he spoke, details began to coalesce, forming a fragmented image from his past, not from the war, but much earlier. He spoke of a forgotten shed behind his childhood home, a place he'd once been accidentally trapped in, the scraping sound echoing in his memory from a rusty latch. The recollection, once terrifying, felt less potent now, softened by the gentle glow of Noah's living room and his quiet, watchful gaze. "I don't know why it came back now," Ryan admitted, the last tendrils of fear finally receding, replaced by a profound weariness. "But I felt so alone, and then I knew I had to come here." He met Noah's eyes, a sudden raw honesty in his own. "I feel safe with you, Noah, more than anywhere, more than with anyone." A peculiar warmth bloomed in Noah's chest at Ryan's confession, a soft, almost imperceptible flutter that took him by surprise. He had meticulously cultivated his solitude for so long, crafting a life of quiet independence. Yet, hearing Ryan articulate such a profound sense of security in his presence stirred something deep within him, an unacknowledged protective instinct. When Ryan offered a small, tentative smile, a genuine softening of his features that chased away the nightmare's shadow, that warm current intensified, spreading through Noah like a gentle tide. It wasn't merely pleasant. It was a revelation. This unexpected surge of emotion was subtly reweaving the fabric of his days. He didn't return the smile directly, but his grip on Ryan's shoulder tightened almost imperceptibly, a silent affirmation. "You don't have to be alone here," Noah said, his voice low, steady. "You never do." Ryan nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. He then drifted to other topics, his childhood, beloved books, the small, forgotten joys he'd almost believed were lost forever. Noah, in turn, shared snippets of his own life, a life that for the first time in a long time felt truly permeable. He spoke of the satisfaction of working with wood, the quiet pride in a perfectly mitered joint, the scent of sawdust in his small workshop. He even recounted taking in a stray cat once, a creature as wary and independent as himself, yet one that had eventually found comfort in his presence. Hours slipped by, punctuated by comfortable silences and shared anecdotes. The initial tension in Ryan's shoulders gradually eased, his posture relaxing. He leaned back into the sofa cushions. His eyes, though still a little shadowed, held a newfound lightness. When Ryan finally rose to head back to his own apartment, the pre-dawn light just beginning to grey the edges of the window, he paused at the door. "Thank you, Noah," he said, his voice soft but clear. "Truly. For everything." Noah simply nodded, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. As he watched Ryan disappear into the hallway, the quiet of his apartment resettled. But it was a different quiet. It wasn't the empty, echoing solitude he had grown accustomed to. It was a stillness imbued with a new kind of anticipation. He found himself thinking of the faint, insistent knock on his door, a sound that had once been an interruption, but now, he realized, was a subtle invitation. A sense of not being alone had begun to bloom within him, a tender shoot pushing through the hardened ground of his carefully constructed independence. He found himself looking forward to that knock, to the quiet presence of his troubled neighbor, to the slow, steady unraveling of his own carefully cultivated solitude. The world outside his four walls, once a distant hum, now held the promise of a deeper, richer connection. The glimmer of new feelings. The dawn light, a pale whisper through Noah's living room window, brought with it a different kind of quiet. Ryan, still curled on the sofa, had finally drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, his breathing even and soft. Noah watched him, the sharp angles of his usual guardedness softened by the vulnerable curve of his spine. The past few hours had unraveled something tight within Noah, something he hadn't known was there until it began to loosen. A protective instinct, raw and urgent, had surged through him when Ryan spoke of the fire, born of the fear that had clung to him like smoke for so long. It was more than empathy. It was a profound, almost primal desire to shield this young man from every shadow. He stirred, a soft groan escaping him, and his eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded them. Then they settled on Noah. A faint smile touched his lips, a genuine, unburdened expression Noah hadn't seen before. "Morning," Ryan murmured, his voice husky with sleep. "Morning," Noah replied, his own voice sounding surprisingly gentle. Ryan stretched, a languid arch of his back, and then sat up. He looked around the familiar room, then back at Noah, and a new sensation bloomed in his chest, surprising and sudden. It wasn't the familiar gratitude, nor the comfort he'd come to associate with Noah. This was different. A warmth, yes, but interwoven with a dizzying current of something more potent, more personal. He noticed the way the light caught the silver threads in Noah's hair, the quiet strength in his hands resting on his knees, the depth in his eyes that had watched over him through the darkest hours. A new lens seemed to have slipped over his perception, revealing a man who was not just a steady presence, but a captivating one. His heart gave an unfamiliar lurch. I should probably get going," Ryan said, the words feeling clumsy, almost like a retreat. The warmth in his chest intensified, now tinged with a strange anxiety. He stood, feeling an awkwardness he hadn't experienced with Noah in weeks. Noah, sensing a subtle shift in Ryan's demeanor, a sudden rigidity, merely nodded. "Stay for coffee." The offer, usually so comforting, now felt like a trap. The new feeling, unnamed and unsettling, pulsed beneath his ribs. It was too much, too soon, too something. "No, I really should head back. Got things to do." The excuse felt flimsy even to him. He usually lingered, enjoying the quiet routine of morning coffee. As he walked across the lawn to his own house, the feeling followed him, a persistent hum. He replayed the scene in his mind. Noah's calm gaze, the understated concern in his voice, the way his presence had simply been there, unyielding. What was this? He'd never felt this particular ache before. It wasn't loneliness, that familiar gnawing void. This was a blossoming, vibrant, almost frightening emotion that made his palms sweat and his stomach clench. He thought of Sarah, of the girls he'd dated before the war, and realized this feeling was nothing like that. This was deeper and more ingrained, something that had quietly woven itself into the fabric of his recovery, of his very being. He spent the day in a haze, the new sensation a constant companion, coloring every thought. He tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as an extension of the profound relief he felt after finally unburdening himself. But it persisted, a quiet insistence that something significant had changed. That evening, as twilight began to bleed across the sky, painting the world in hues of orange and purple, the usual pull towards Noah's door began. But this time, it was met with resistance. The thought of seeing Noah, of feeling that strange, potent warmth again, filled him with a confusing mix of longing and dread. He paced his living room, a restless energy thrumming beneath his skin. If he went over, and if he allowed himself to feel that again, where would it lead? He wasn't ready for whatever this was. He was just starting to mend, to find a semblance of peace. This new emotion felt like a tremor, threatening to destabilize the fragile ground he'd only just found. He looked out his window towards Noah's house, a single light now glowing in the living room. The familiar comfort it usually offered was now laced with apprehension. He considered the routine, the knock, the unspoken invitation, the quiet hours, the deep conversations. Was it still safe? Or had something irrevocably shifted, making their sacred space into something complicated? He pictured Noah, sitting there, perhaps reading, perhaps waiting. A wave of guilt washed over him, but it was quickly overshadowed by the unfamiliar fear of this new emotional landscape. Maybe, just for tonight, it was better to stay away, to untangle this knot in his chest before he ventured back into the quiet, powerful orbit of Noah. The thought of not going brought a hollow ache, but the thought of going, of facing this burgeoning feeling head-on, was terrifying. He turned away from the window, sinking onto his sofa, the silence of his own house suddenly deafening. The empty porch. The first night Ryan didn't appear. Noah chalked it up to an aberration. Perhaps an early slumber, or comfort found elsewhere. The grandfather clock in the hall tolled 11, then midnight, each resonant chime amplifying the quiet in Noah's small home. He sat, a book splayed on his lap, its pages unread, his gaze fixated on the front door, half expecting the familiar, soft tap. When the moon finally yielded to dawn's first blush, Noah accepted it. Ryan wasn't coming. The second night offered no such distractions. The book remained closed. Noah merely occupied his armchair in the dim living room, the quiet pressing in. He listened, not for a knock, but for any sign of life from next door, a window latch, a floorboard sigh. Nothing. The stillness was absolute, a heavy shroud muting the usual nocturnal whispers. A knot of unease tightened in his chest. Had he misspoken, pushed too far perhaps, by delving into Ryan's past? Ryan had seemed so raw, so fragile, and Noah, in his clumsy attempt at solace, might have inadvertently reopened an old wound. A pang of regret pricked him. By the third night, the empty porch felt like a phantom limb, a void where presence once was. Noah paced. His old house, once a sanctuary of solitude, and he now felt vast and cold without the promise of Ryan's late-night arrival. He longed for their hushed conversations, the comfortable silences, the subtle warmth Ryan's presence had lent to his solitary existence. He hadn't realized how deeply he'd come to cherish those moments until they vanished. The scent of brewing coffee, usually a herald of their shared ritual, now seemed a redundant offering to an empty chair. He found himself glancing out the window more frequently, his gaze drawn to Ryan's darkened house. No lights flickered, no shadows stirred behind the curtains. It was as if the house itself had fallen dormant, a mirror to its occupant's sudden quietude. A deep, persistent worry began to settle over him. Ryan, with his restless spirit and shadowed eyes, always seemed poised on a precipice. Had Noah, in his effort to anchor him, inadvertently sent him adrift? Sleep became a stranger. Noah would lie staring at the ceiling, hours dissolving into each other, each moment a stark echo of Ryan's continued absence. He replayed their last exchange, dissecting every word, every gesture. Ryan's abrupt departure, the flash of something unreadable in his eyes, a blend of raw pain and something else, something Noah couldn't quite decipher. Was it fear? Or perhaps a retreat from the intimacy that had begun to unfurl between them? The thought made his chest ache. He had grown accustomed to the cadence of Ryan's visits, to the way the young man had tentatively woven himself into the fabric of Noah's quiet life. Now, that fabric felt frayed, incomplete. He sought distraction. He worked in the garden, pruning overgrown roses with a frantic, focused intensity. He cleaned the house, polishing surfaces until they gleamed, as if physical order could somehow mend his emotional disarray. But every chore, every task, only amplified the pervasive silence. The scent of damp earth, usually grounding, now felt hollow. The gleam of polished wood mocked the dull ache in his heart. He missed the way Ryan would lean against the doorframe, his shoulders subtly less tense with each visit. He missed the low thrum of their conversations, the unspoken understanding that had taken root between them like a hardy vine. Most of all, he missed the quiet sense of purpose Ryan had inadvertently brought to his days. The anticipation of Ryan's arrival had given structure to his evenings, a cornerstone to his routine. Now, that cornerstone was gone, leaving a gaping void. The soft talks, once a gentle comfort, were now a poignant memory, a reminder of what was and what was lost. The comfortable presence, once a given, was now a gnawing yearning. The empty porch, once merely a threshold, had become a stark symbol of his escalating fear and loneliness. He considered walking over, knocking on Ryan's door, but a sense of propriety, or perhaps the chilling fear of rejection, held him rooted. He didn't want to seem intrusive, didn't want to drive Ryan further inward. He knew instinctively that Ryan needed space, but the waiting was an agony. Each passing night, the silence grew denser, the worry more profound. He felt like an old lighthouse keeper, scanning the horizon for a ship that might never return, his own light dimming with each starless night. Lost in the storm. The wind, a banshee's shriek, assailed the windows of Ryan's small house. Rain lashed against the panes, each drop a percussive beat mirroring the frantic rhythm of his heart. He hunched on the edge of his rumpled bed, the room steeped in a gloom broken only by the lightning's intermittent, jagged tears through the inky blackness outside. The power had flickered moments ago, leaving him to the storm's raw, untamed voice. For 3 nights, he'd lived in self-imposed exile, his own home's hushed atmosphere a stark counterpoint to the easy quiet he'd found next door. He'd told himself he needed space, needed to disentangle the bewildering knot of emotions Noah's gentle inquiries had stirred. Yet, this solitude hadn't brought clarity. It had brought a suffocating void, a hollow ache in his chest that throbbed in concert with the storm's relentless assault. Each thunderclap made him flinch, his body tensing, recalling other storms, other nights. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the encroaching memories, but the darkness behind his lids offered no sanctuary. The walls of his house, usually a comfort, now felt like they were closing in, a crushing embrace. He was utterly alone, a realization that twisted in his gut like a cold, sharp blade. He pictured Noah, the quiet strength in his gaze, the subtle curve of a smile that rarely reached his lips, but always brought warmth to Ryan's spirit. He recalled the soft lamplight in Noah's living room, the way steam spiraled from their tea mugs, the easy cadence of their shared breaths. It had been a sanctuary, a fragile haven from the internal tempest, a place where his persistent shadows seemed to recede. Now, those shadows were reclaiming their territory with a vengeance. He'd grappled with understanding these new, intense sensations. Unsettling, yes, but also strangely compelling. A profound pull towards Noah, a need for his presence that transcended mere companionship. It was a yearning, a deep, resonant hum beneath his skin that had only intensified with Noah's vulnerability, with the glimpses into his own carefully guarded past. That night, after Noah had spoken of his losses, something within Ryan had shifted, a barrier crumbling, and the sheer force of it had sent him fleeing. He had convinced himself it was fear, the familiar dread of intimacy, of being seen too clearly. But now, amidst the storm's churning chaos, he understood it was more than just fear. It was a terrifying, exhilarating longing, a yearning for connection, for understanding, for the unspoken solace only Noah seemed capable of providing. The wind escalated its mournful cry, echoing his own unspoken plea. He shivered, drawing his knees closer, arms wrapped tightly around himself as if to bind his fractured pieces. He was adrift in a sea of confusion, the only safe harbor miles away. Pushing off the bed, he began to pace the small room, his bare feet cold on the wooden floor. The silence, punctuated solely by the storm's fury, was deafening. He couldn't shake the image of Noah, alone in his quiet house, perhaps wondering where Ryan was, perhaps hurt by his abrupt departure. The thought twisted his stomach. He hadn't meant to inflict pain. He'd only been trying to shield himself from a pain he couldn't yet name. But now, the ache of being without Noah was far greater, a gnawing emptiness, a void the storm seemed determined to fill with its own terrifying clamor. He needed to speak to him, needed to explain, needed simply to be near him. He couldn't endure another moment of this isolation, this suffocating aloneness. The realization struck him with the force of a tidal wave. He couldn't do this by himself anymore. He needed Noah. He stumbled towards the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. The world outside was a blurry watercolor of rain and wind, momentarily illuminated by another blinding flash of lightning. He could just make out the faint glow of a light in Noah's kitchen, a beacon in the tempest, a lifeline. His breath hitched. He had to go. The storm raged, the wind screamed, but he couldn't remain here. He had to cross the small patch of lawn, had to brave the elements, had to knock on that door. His hand trembled as he reached for the doorknob, a new kind of fear mingling with a desperate, overwhelming hope. He had to go back to Noah. He had to. Home, heart to heart. The deluge was a living thing, clawing at him with icy fingers, but Ryan barely registered the physical assault. Each pounding drop on his face was a dull echo of the frantic beat in his chest, a rhythm set by the singular, overwhelming need to reach Noah. The path, once a familiar ribbon of asphalt, was now a treacherous current, the streetlights hazy halos through the driving rain. He stumbled, his soaked sneakers squelching with each desperate stride, the wind a banshee's wail in his ears, trying to snatch away his resolve. He ran, not from anything, but to something, to someone. Every muscle screamed. Every breath was a ragged gasp. But the image of Noah's quiet strength, the memory of his steady gaze, pulled him forward like a lifeline. He wasn't just fleeing the suffocating silence of his own home. He was hurtling towards the only sanctuary he knew. Finally, the dark silhouette of Noah's house loomed, a beacon in the storm. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead, streamed down his face, blurring his vision, but he didn't slow. He didn't bother with the bell, his fist a frantic drum against the sturdy wood of the front door. Once, twice, then again, a desperate plea for entry, a primal cry in the wilderness of his own turmoil. His knuckles ached, but he kept pounding, a raw, insistent rhythm that vibrated up his arm, echoing the tremor that had seized his entire being. The porch light flickered on, a sudden splash of warmth in the oppressive gloom. And then the door creaked open. Noah stood there, framed by the soft glow, his face a mixture of shock and something else Ryan couldn't quite decipher in the dim light. His eyes, usually so calm and knowing, widened slightly, a flicker of concern crossing them as they swept over Ryan's drenched and shaking form. Ryan. Noah's voice was a low rumble, laced with surprise and a hint of something unreadable. What happened? Are you hurt? Ryan shivered, not just from the cold, but from the sudden rush of emotion that threatened to buckle his knees. The words caught in his throat, a tangled knot of fear, relief, and an aching, profound vulnerability he hadn't known he possessed. He looked at Noah, truly looked at him, and in that moment, the careful walls he'd spent a lifetime constructing crumbled into dust. The storm outside faded. The roar of the wind diminished to a whisper. All that existed was Noah's concerned face, the warmth emanating from the open doorway, and the undeniable truth that had been hammering at his soul for days. I couldn't, Ryan began, his voice a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the relentless drumming of the rain. He took a shaky breath, the cold air burning his lungs. I couldn't stay away. His eyes, wide and raw, met Noah's, pleading for understanding, for acceptance. I tried, Noah. I tried to push it away, to pretend it wasn't real. But he trailed off, swallowing hard, the enormity of his feelings a physical ache in his chest. I love you, Noah. God. I think I've loved you since the first night I knocked on your door. The confession hung in the air, a fragile, trembling thing, suspended between the howling storm and the quiet warmth of Noah's home. Ryan's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird desperate for flight. He braced himself for rejection, for confusion, for the familiar sting of pushing too far. But Noah didn't recoil. He didn't even hesitate. A subtle shift in Noah's expression, a softening around his eyes, a gentle parting of his lips spoke volumes. Without a word, he reached out, his hand finding Ryan's arm, his grip firm and reassuring. He didn't pull him gently, he tugged him in, a swift, deliberate motion that brought Ryan stumbling over the threshold, out of the tempest and into the soft, inviting glow of the living room. The door swung shut with a soft click, sealing them inside, away from the chaos. The sudden quiet was profound, broken only by the distant murmur of the storm and the ragged sound of Ryan's breathing. Noah's arms wrapped around him, strong and steady, pulling him close, pressing his soaked body against the warmth of his own. Ryan sagged against him, the tension that had held him rigid for days finally dissolving. He buried his face in Noah's shoulder, inhaling the scent of him, wood smoke and old books and something uniquely Noah. It was an anchoring scent, a balm to his fractured soul. Noah's hand found the back of his head, his fingers threading through Ryan's wet hair, holding him close. There was no need for words, not yet. The silent embrace spoke more eloquently than any confession, any declaration. It was a promise, a homecoming, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken bond that had woven itself between them, thread by invisible thread. Ryan closed his eyes, tears mingling with the rainwater on his cheeks. Finally, truly, home.